What personality type are you? What motivates your behavior? Discover the answers to these fascinating questions on Types, Your Personality Revealed. Hosted by personality experts Katherine and David Fauvre.
Welcome to Types, Your Personality Revealed. My name is David. My co-host Katherine and I are experts in personality typing. This is our third show in our ongoing series in which we're exploring what motivates human behavior, and in particular the 9 Enneagram personality types. In our last show, we took a deeper look at what our research had revealed about the self-image, core motivation, and core fear of each of the 9 Enneagram types. In this show, we're going to take you to the very cutting edge of Enneagram application. We'll share with you a stunning new discovery that revolutionizes the way the Enneagram is being used. This discovery significantly enhances the power of the Enneagram to transform your life and relationships. It is simple to understand and apply. This new way to use the Enneagram is based on our most advanced empirical research and thousands of hours of in-depth coaching sessions. It provides an even more accurate and powerful way to use the Enneagram. This advanced way of using the Enneagram has already been adopted around the world by Enneagram enthusiasts and has been endorsed by leading Enneagram teachers, including Russ Hudson, David Daniels, and Angelos Arian, a protege of Joseph Campbell and an anthropologist. It has traditionally been taught that we each have just one Enneagram type. In simple terms, this is true. Amazingly, however, our extensive research has revealed that our personality actually has 3 Enneagram types, not just one. We call this your Tritype, which means 3 types. Next, Katherine is going to share more with you about this fascinating new way to use the Enneagram.
Enneagram Tritype identifies key aspects of your personality, which, when understood, can help you to develop critical self-awareness. More importantly, Tritype gives clues about your internal process, further defining the way in which you view your world and why you do what you do. It also reveals the 3 strategies you will use to manage problems. The 3 types within your Tritype intersect and create a unique focus of attention. The high side of this intersection is that it gives your life direction, focus, and purpose. The low side of this intersection is that it creates a blind spot, which can narrow your ability to accurately self-assess, often keeping you unaware of your full potential. Tritype explains how people of the same Enneagram type can be so different from one another, and why those that share the same 3 Enneagram types in their Tritype have a natural affinity for one another, regardless of which type is dominant. This knowledge emerged as the result of several research studies. In 1995, I conducted my first research on the internal experience of Enneagram type, where I found several intriguing patterns. This began additional studies examining the core fears of each type. In coaching sessions, using an in-depth inquiry process, clients consistently had the core fears of 3 Enneagram types and not just one. There was always one type that was dominant, but the other 2 types would surface when clients described themselves and when describing their problems. These 3 types were not necessarily connected by a line to their primary type or connected by a wing. What was particularly interesting to me was that the 3 types always included a type from each center of intelligence. One head type, a 5, 6, or 7, one heart type, a 2, 3, or 4, and one gut type, an 8, 9, or 1. I then met a teacher from the Eureka School and learned that Enneagram pioneer Oscar Ichazo had introduced the concept of trifix, and that people have not one, but rather 3 Enneagram type fixations. This matched what I had found in my work with clients. Shortly thereafter, David and I began to collaborate on multiple Enneagram projects. With David's psychology and Enneagram background and internet expertise, we were able to conduct research on a much broader scale. Together, we developed and launched online testing instruments and began collecting data that correlated the Ennystyle questionnaire with the results of the Enneacards test. After several years of research, we coined the term Tritype to distinguish our research findings.
In addition, an MIT PhD programmer was commissioned to create software that could be used to validate these findings. This was done by analyzing the Ennea-style questionnaires for language patterns in regards to instinct, type, and tritype. As a result, we now have software that can determine Enneagram type, instinct, and tritype from the complex language patterns found in the Ennea-style questionnaire results. This is statistically validated that we actually use 3 Enneagram types, not just one. In the rest of this show, we will take a fascinating look at this new way to use the Enneagram. So what I recommend next is, for those of you who are watching this potentially online, is that you pause the show and you actually go and take the Tritype test, and then come back and finish the show when you have your results. When you take our Enneagram test at enneagram.net, you'll actually get results that look like this. And here we have 6 Ennea cards. Each card actually represents one of the 9 Enneagram types. And in this person's results, their tritype came out of 4, 6, and 8, which also happens to be my tritype. So, Katherine, is there anything you'd like to add about these results?
Yes, in particular, if you look, the top 2 cards are type 4. So this indicates that the person uses their heart first, because 4 is in the heart center. The second 2 cards are type 6, and that's from the head center. So this person moves from their heart to their head. And then the last 3 cards were type 8, and that's the gut. So this person uses their heart, their head, and then their gut to handle problems.
And so if someone goes and takes the test at enneagram.net, they'll get the results of their tritype.
Right, in the order in which they ranked them.
Great. So next, how about we take a quick review of the Enneagram type names?
Yes, okay, the moral perfectionist is focused on what is wrong and in need of correction, and they spend their time trying to improve things they feel are flawed and errors that they may pay attention to. The type 2 is the supportive advisor, and they focus on what's needed, and especially what's needed emotionally, what people need, not just circumstances call for. And the 3 is the successful achiever, and they focus on what's efficient so they can find the best way of doing something to get the job done. And the 4 is the romantic individualist, and they focus on what's missing, and especially what they perceive to be important in terms of what's missing. And it will have an emotional content as well. And this is your type, David.
Right, and so the 2, 3, and 4 are in the heart center, and now we're going to move into the head center with the type 5.
Yeah. The 5 is the investigative thinker, and this is the type that's evaluating and assessing what's observable and what is the significance of that information and what additional information is needed to make a conclusion that's accurate and concise and handles a problem. The 6 is the loyal guardian, and this is the person who focuses on what can go wrong and what you need to do to match others and be involved with others to have safety, certainty, and security. But most of all, they recognize what we need to pay attention to. The 7 is the entertaining optimist, and this type focuses on what is possible, what variables can come in play, what diversity would be helpful in any given situation.
And so now we're moving out of the head center and back into the gut center with the type 8.
The 8 is the protective challenger. This is the person focusing on what's weak or vulnerable and needs to be reinforced or supported in some way in terms of protection. The 2 focuses on supporting from the heart. The 8 is supporting in a more protective way. The 9 is the peaceful mediator, and this is the person that is seeking harmony and really can address what any group of people or individual needs to be at peace and comfortable. This type really wants comfort.
So we've just taken a quick review of the types. There's lots more information online at enneagram.net. So let's do a review of the centers before we take a deep dive into tritype.
Okay.
So in a very simple way, the Enneagram can be broken down to just 3 dominant types. There's basically head people, gut people, and heart people. Another simple way to think about that is there's 3 types of intelligence. We all use all three types, but one is dominant. You have basically body-based, instinctual or gut intelligence. We have heart-based or sort of feeling and emotional intelligence. That's my type is a 4. Or as in the head type, we have thinking or sort of intellectual-based intelligence or focus. So a simple way to think about the Enneagram is that all of us has a dominant Enneagram type in one of these centers and a dominant type of intelligence that we sort of overuse or we focus on.
Right.
So is there anything you'd like to add on sort of helping people get a good grounding and understanding of the centers before we go into Tritype, where we're going to pull it all together?
Yes, it's important to understand that this is how we think, feel, and act. And when you're a gut type, you're going to act first. And when you're a heart type, you're going to feel first. And as a head type, you're going to think first. There'll always be that moment to assess things. And the order in which you think, feel, or act, think, feel, is really critical to understanding how these three types in your Tritype influence how you do what you do and the way that you do it.
So we're going to go much deeper into this, but just as a quick example, I'm the Tritype, the 4, 6, and 8. So that would mean that I would use my heart center, then my head center, then my gut center. And for you, your Tritype is?
Very different. I'm the 8, 7, 4. So I first have a reaction, and then I assess and come to some sort of conclusion about it, and then I feel.
So now what we're going to do is to take you deep into an understanding of the Tritype. And we're going to start with the very basics here. The Tritype basically identifies your dominant Enneagram type in each of the 3 centers. It stands to reason that as we all have all 3 centers, we all have a head, a heart, and a gut, that we would have a preferred style or way of using that intelligence in each of those 3 centers. We use the Tritype in a preferred order, and that, to me, is absolutely fascinating, that I always tend to use my emotions first because I use my heart center first. You use your instinct first. Second, I go to my head center. You also go to your head center second. Yeah. But what's interesting is that I go to my gut center last, and you go to your emotions last in your particular Tritype. So the Tritype order is important. The first type in your Tritype sequence is your dominant type. So if I tell someone I'm a 4, 6, 8, that basically means I'm a type 4. If Katherine says that she's an 8, 7, 4, she's an 8 because that's the first number that she's listing. A little bit later, we're going to understand that there's even a more complex way of looking at that to see sort of an archetypal play out.
And I would want to add it's a consistent order and a preferred order, but it's also a descending order. It constantly repeats itself very quickly, rapid cycling. So if you are a feel, think, act, you're going to feel, think, act, feel, think, act, feel, think, act. And I'm going to act, think, feel over and over and over again, trying to handle our problems.
Absolutely. That's certainly my experience working with a lot of people, and also my personal experience, that we use this Tritype constantly. And as you're going to go into later, we also will use, the ego will sort of choose the one that seems to work the best if our dominant type isn't working at the moment to get us what we need. Some key Tritype concepts before we go even deeper into how this can be used. The types within your Tritype may not necessarily be the types along your lines of connection. This is a very common question that we get. For example, as a type 4, I have a connection to 1 and 2. As an 8, you have a connection to 2 and 5. But your Tritype may not have anything to do with those
It may
lines.
or may not match. And when it does match, then it's easy. But when it's different, it's very helpful because it defines nuances that are really more personal.
That's a really great point. I know in my own discovery process that trying to decide whether I had the 1 in the Tritype or the 8 in the Tritype took me a while. It took me about a year because as a 4, I have a line to 1. So that would make sense. Some may have a type within their Tritype that is a wing, or it may be a type on the line of connections. For example, in your case, where you have a 7 wing as an 8, and you also have 7 in the Tritype, it kind of doubles that up for you.
It really amplifies it. In fact, a lot of times people, when they're just learning the Enneagram, think I'm a 7 because I'm positive and upbeat and I like change and variety. But when push comes to shove, I'm more inclined to hold steady and be firm and be more like an 8.
And what I've found with myself is that with 6 in the Tritype, even though I have a 5 wing as a 4, I'm not as 5-ish as 4s that I meet who have a 5 wing who also have 5 in the Tritype. And later in the show, we're going to be showing you some video examples of different Tritype combinations. And in particular, we have a woman, Tara, who is a 4-5-1 Tritype, and she has 5 in her Tritype and a 5 wing. So we can see that it makes her an even more 5-ish 4 than, for example, someone who's a 4-6-8 or Kim, who's a 4-7-9. It really changes that flavor quite a bit.
Dramatically, actually.
Would you like to say any more about that?
I would say that whatever combination you have is really particular to you, and added with your life experiences will shape how you view the world. But when you have something that dominant that is not your primary type, it can often confuse people when they're first determining their Enneagram type, and they can mistype. And once they understand those variables, it makes it so much easier to see which type is in charge, and then much more readily enjoy the benefits of knowing their Enneagram type.
That's a great example. I know a 5, and he thought he was a 4 for a long time, and it turned out that he was a 5 with a 4 wing, but he also had 4 in the Tritype. So it kind of doubled up his 4. So that makes a lot of sense. And whereas in another case, if they don't have that, it can actually, in a way, it's almost like diluting the wing, or it can almost look like a different wing in a certain way. So let's go ahead and take an even deeper understanding. And Katherine, would you like to begin to tell us about this concept of archetype with the Tritype and how that works?
The Tritype archetype emerged later. Like initially, when I was doing this research, I saw that the Tritype helped delineate between those that shared the same Enneagram type. But then I began to see that there was a pattern of people with the same Tritype regardless which type was in charge.
Now just real quick, can you give me an example here, because we're using these numbers real quickly, of when you say someone has the same Tritype, what does that mean? Because these numbers can be ordered in a different way.
Right. So for example, you can be a 1-2-5 Tritype as a 1, but you can also have a 5-1-2 or a 2-1-5. They're different because their dominant type is different, but they share the same 3 Enneagram types. And when you pull together the same 3 types, there's a unique focus of attention that's created. And this is what emerged over time. This intersection created a dynamic that was similar regardless of what type was in charge. So when I looked at, for example, a 2-7-9 and a 9-7-2, I would see so much in common. And in the coaching sessions, they would be very different in their lead focus, but very similar as to the types they were going to use.
So what you're saying, if I'm understanding this, is that, and this is to review for people who are learning this for the first time, is that when we bring these 3 types together, regardless of the order that they're being used, it creates a certain archetypal energy that becomes like a type unto itself.
Yeah, personality all of its own.
So, for example, I'm a 4-6-8, and I've met, for example, I've met a man who's a 6-4-8, and we had a tremendous amount in common. In some ways, I was actually more like him than I was other 4s.
Right.
And that's why we've given a name to the different Tritype archetypal combinations.
Right. And the names are very helpful because they identify kind of the essence and the focus of attention and where the energy goes. And I find that, for example, as an 8-7-4, I'm going to really share a lot in common with a 4-7-8 and a 7, and in fact, the most, another 7-8-4, and then the 4-7-8. We're all going to be creative. We're all going to be focused on being innovative and distinct within our respective center. And the one that's in charge, of course, is still the most important, but I'm going to really be able to work well with people that share the same Tritype archetype. And this is what was so unexpected and developed over time and continues to develop.
So how many Tritype archetype names are there?
There are 27. And when I'm talking about an individual, I will say whatever type they have first, and then the type they use second and third. But when I'm talking about the archetype in general, I always begin with the smallest number. So, for example, it would be a 1, 2, 5, regardless of which type is dominant, unless the individual is talking about themselves, and then it would be 5, 1, 2, 2, 1, 5, etc.
Right. So just to clarify, if for those of you who are learning this for the first time, it may sound complicated, but in many ways it's really very simple. If we're talking about the Tritype archetype, we just always name the types in the order that they would occur around the Enneagram, in a clockwise order. It's very simple. So if we're talking about the archetype, it's just the clockwise order. If we're talking about an individual person, we will state their Enneagram type first, their dominant type, and then we'll state the other two types that they use in the order that they prefer to use them. So these are two different ways to use the Tritype, and they both are one is a way to really precisely and accurately take the Enneagram and define someone's personality structure and what their ego is doing for that particular person in a very precise and accurate way. That's like taking a microscope, and if just knowing your Enneagram type is taking it on a power of 10, with the Tritype, we're taking this up to like a power of 100, because we're adding, going from really 9 potential combinations to 81 combinations.
Right.
And that really gives us a much greater understanding, in particular, of why different people that are different Enneagram types, that are the same Enneagram type, can be still so different.
Yes, dramatically different. And then in the next show, we're going to go into instinct, and that further defines it. But the closest you can get is if you meet someone that has the same Tritype that you have with the same type that's dominant. It's very powerful. You'll have a natural ability to communicate. It won't take as much work to understand one another, a lot less translation.
Now, we've also found that each Tritype archetypal combination actually there's a certain life mission, and that to be out of alignment with those 3 types is really problematic, and that for people to reach their potential, they need to know those 3 types, and so that they can really get in alignment with the energy that those 3 types are bringing in. Is there anything else you'd add to understanding this life mission concept? Well, especially with career.
When you're thinking about your career, if you know your 3 types, it helps you to really understand the kind of work that will be enjoyable and pleasing long term. So for example, if you need to be positive and optimistic, like a 7-9, if you're in a career where you have to deal with a lot of negativity, you're not going to be happy for a very long time. That career will start to lose its interest. And if you find a career that calls on you being positive and optimistic and brainstorming and seeing things and caring and tending for others, like the 7-9-2 does, then you're going to be happy much, much longer and feel like you're fulfilling your purpose. It's a sense of purpose that people have shared with me, and that it feels much more pleasing and enjoyable.
And if we go back to like looking at Jung or these great psychological thinkers, they all have said some basically consistent observations that for us to be happy in our lives, for us to be able to achieve our potential or to do whatever our life mission is, we've got to be in alignment with these fundamental archetypal energies that are the way that we're made. And all of the research now on the brain suggests that a lot of what we call personality type largely is just innate temperament, that we're born with this. So it's an incredibly powerful thing to learn this about yourself, because not only does it help you to really achieve your potential, it helps you to understand parts of yourself that maybe you haven't been paying enough attention to, or it helps you explain parts of yourself that you're struggling with. it was very helpful to me to really understand that I had 8 in my Tritype and not 1.
Right.
It explained a lot about myself to myself. It also is interesting because that 8 really counterbalances the 4 and 6, whereas a Tritype that has, for example, 4, 6, 9, we're both 4s, but that 8 or 9 at the end makes a big difference in terms of
Well,
the
4,
way
6,
it plays
and
out.
9 are triple doubt. They're the type from each center of intelligence that's going to be more wary and cautious and questioning and assessing at a much greater level. Whereas the 4, 6, 8 is going to have some of that questioning and doubt, but then there'll be the assertion. The 8 will want to be decisive. So it really gives a very different energy. And I've also found that with the 4, 6, 8, there's a quality of the 6 that's more counterphobic than phobic.
Well, that would make sense, having 8 there
Yeah.
on the end, and then maybe if you have 9 in the Tritype, the 4, 6, 9, that 6 is more phobic. I think we've definitely seen that. And fascinatingly, the idea here is that these 3 types really are coming together and creating a type unto themselves.
Right.
And the research also revealed that there's a blind spot that
Right.
occurs, that there's a way that these 3 types collude in the way that they're seeing the world that is a very difficult challenge for the person that has that Tritype, because it's as if every part of their intelligence, their whole system of observing reality, their head, their heart, and their gut, where it overlaps, that they have a blind spot, it amplifies it. So
Right.
can you add anything to that?
Well, just think about job reviews we've had where someone will say, for example, in my own job reviews, they would say, well, you know, you could just be more cooperative. And I would think to myself, I'm practically bending myself into a pretzel, cooperating. But if you think about it, the 4, the 7, and the 8 are all free thinkers, independent in their way of doing things. They really are nonconformists. The high side of this combination, of course, is that they're undeterred by opposition or those that don't have their vision. But the low side is that they can't see, myself included, the ways in which I may be uncooperative. And it's not by intent, it's just a blind spot, because I have 3 types that have a different focus of attention.
Right, so in a simple way to think about this, if you had 3 lookout scouts, for you this is an 8 and a 7 and a 4, they're all, the way that they're all a little bit blind in the same way would make you very difficult to see that. And that's why I think the Tritype is so powerful, because it can let us see that immediately. So a lot of what maybe would have been discovered in long periods of psychotherapy or psychoanalysis, we now can learn about ourselves very quickly and immediately start to work on this growing edge that each Tritype has. So what can you tell us about the growing edge?
Well, the growing edge is the way in which the Tritype type, the archetype, can know that predictably they're going to have that problem. And they'll be able to identify it and then know what to challenge. For example, as the truth teller, the 4, 6, 8, you need to learn, and those that share your Tritype, when to voice your concern. I mean, your Tritype is exceptional at saying the emperor has no clothes. And you're right, but there's a time and a place to say it.
Right, that's certainly been something that's been a lifelong journey for myself to learn. And it fascinates me that when I've met other men of the same Tritype combination, even a man who was an 864, I just recently met a doctor who was using the Tritype quite a bit, and he's a 648. And we all had the same challenge, which is that we felt in our lives that we often saw things and voiced it, and other people didn't see it yet, and that was hard. And it's a triple reactive combination here. So whereas the 279 is triple optimistic, it's triple positive outlook. For example, with 468, you've got 3 reactive types. So there's nothing slowing down that reactivity with that combination. And each combination will have something like that. And we do have a book on Tritype, which goes into all the combinations. We obviously can't do all of it in this show. We're going to show you 5 combinations in here in a little bit. But before we go there, I wanted to say if you had any suggestions on how to work with the Tritype in coaching.
Yeah, there are 2 very different ways to work with the Tritype. The first of which is just to see the differences, that all 4s are not the same, and how the other 2 types in the Tritype shape the quality of that 4, for example, 6 or 8 or 7, 9, 2, 1 or 5. And then the second type that emerged later, as I shared earlier, is to work with the archetype itself and see how you can understand those nuances at a much greater level by understanding the variables. So what happens when 3 assertive types come together, like a 3, 7, and 8? Or when 3 creative types come together, like a 4, 7, 8? Or 3 productive types come together, and on and on. And it reinforces and creates a much sharper perspective. And with that perspective, we have someone that's actually gifted. These are the innate strengths that one will have. And it's much more diverse and gives you a lot of material to work with, especially in coaching, because you can help people identify what those variables are. And then they can begin to see it for themselves and not feel confused when they hear people comment on that aspect of their personality.
Absolutely. And I think, again, the whole value of personality typing is to me, it's twofold. It's to develop compassion for other people, to understand their type and their experience, to be able to walk in their shoes, and also to develop compassion for ourselves, but also to help us more quickly reach our gifts and to align ourselves with who we naturally are. Just before we go in and we take a look at some of these fascinating examples, video interviews, I wanted to mention that you and I have been working on a project to create a career finder based on the Enneagram, and that we've actually found, as you've mentioned, that Tritype is even more important than just your dominant Enneagram type in determining your career.
Right.
And in particularly in terms, as you mentioned, in terms of what you're going to want in a career, what's going to make you happy, what kind of environment you're going to be happy in. It really isn't enough to just know your Enneagram type. You've really got to include your whole Tritype. And we hope to be launching this actually on Facebook relatively soon. So I look forward to doing that. But it was fascinating to me as we did that career research to really find out how influential the Tritype was in terms of what made people happy in the type of work that they chose. So what we'd like to do now is let's take a look at some of these examples of the different Tritypes. We have some video clips of several different Tritype combinations. And the clips are not particularly long, but we're going to let people know in advance what we'd like you to look for, what we think would be helpful to look at. So let's start and just talk about the Tritype of the systems builder. The first example we're going to look at is Sarah, and she happens to be a 3-7-1 combination. So can you tell us a little bit about what that archetype is in terms of what does it mean for Sarah to be a systems builder?
Well, it's an interesting combination because the 1, the 3, and the 7 are all focused on different ways to look at something to build. So the 1 is looking at the foundational details and qualities needed for something to be done well. And the 3 is looking for the most effective and efficient way to do something. And the 7 has the vision. So when those 3 types come together, you have someone that's really good at knowing what to do and how to approach it in a fun way. So they want to meet their goals, and in this case 3 is in charge, but they also want to do it in a way that's pleasant. They want it to be enjoyable. They want it to be interpersonal, but they want to do it well.
Right, so this is someone who has 2 perfectionistic types, 1 and 3, but then they have that 7 coming in there and saying, let's make it fun and let's keep it positive. The life purpose for this type is to figure out what needs to be done and find a pleasant way to do it. They're a true systems builder with a positive attitude. The blind spot for this type is that they can be so focused on what others view as appropriate, positive, and successful that they miss seeing what is necessary and truly important to themselves. So is there anything quickly that you'd like to add onto that in terms of the blind spot for the systems builder before we take a look at one?
Well, let's look at the growing edge. You know, what happens when you have that blind spot? Then the growing edge is to focus on your inner world, because those 3 types tend to focus on external successes, especially when 3 is in charge. And the journey for this archetype, Tritype archetype, is to begin to look at the resources internally and have the internal and external match.
Okay, well, let's take a look at Sarah. Sarah is the 371. She's the systems builder. And in particular, pay attention to Sarah's affect, and that you can see her threeness, but you can also see that there's a precise quality from coming in from the 1, and there's a way that you could see that she would be sort of naturally a teacher archetype as well. And she also looks like a fun person, so we get the 7 in there. So let's take a look at Sarah.
So my tritype is 371, and it took me a while of observing what strategies I was using, and I definitely realized that I did use the 3, the 7, and the 1. One of the ways that I recognize that is that I have a lot of perfectionism in my work. I want to make sure that whatever it is I'm doing, it's not just the best, but it's also really just perfect. And at the same time, I like to be creative and I like my freedom. So I knew that 7 was in there someplace.
So we've talked a lot about our language research, and what fascinates me here with this example with Sarah is that she's using the language of types 3, 7, and 1. Right? Yeah. And that, you know, we did not script this for her. This is just naturally coming to the top of her head. She used a term like perfect. 3s are focused on efficiency and they can cut corners. They're not wanting to be perfectionists like type 1s. So she's got to have 1 in the tritype. And then the idea of wanting to be creative and positive, you know, she used those words as well. So anything else that you would add in terms of what we just saw here with 7 to show the example of the systems builder?
Well, the knowing what is pleasant, I mean, even ending with a smile, like we'll notice in the next tapes that not everyone ends with a smile, and there's both the image type of 3 wants to have that pleasant quality, it's appropriate for the 1, and it's enjoyable for the 7. So you'll see it in the micro expressions, and you'll see it also in the word choices, as you mentioned.
And what career is Sarah in?
She's actually an esthetician. So she works with people, and she has to be precise and have the technical expertise as well.
It seems like it'd be an excellent career for this particular tritype combination. So let's take a look at another combination. Next, we're going to look at Dr. David Daniels, who is a very well-known Enneagram teacher and expert in his own right, and we greatly appreciate him working with us. David defined himself as the 6-2-1 tritype, which we call the supporter. So can you tell us a little bit about what the archetype of the supporter is?
Yes, when these 3 types come together, you get someone that is very focused on being of assistance. The 2 wants to help people, the 6 wants to help in their way. They want to be of assistance and be connected to you. And then the 1 wants to do what's right. So when these 3 types come together, you have someone that feels they should help and they must be of assistance and be kind to others. And we appreciate him helping us with this,
very much.
You know, even though he's very busy. And it's a great example. It's also a very diligent 6. That 1 brings the diligence, and the 2 brings a lot of compassion. We feel more warmth whenever the 6 has 2 in the tritype.
So the life mission for this particular type is to find structured ways to give and be of assistance to others, as you just mentioned. Their blind spot is that they can be overly fixated in their opinion of what is right and be rigid in their expectations. All 3 of those types have rigidity in their character structure, so that makes sense. So when we look at this roll-in, let's pay particular attention to a few different things that I've observed. One, David is particularly warm and friendly, but you also have a sense of his mentorship. And so you really see that coming together. Anything you'd like to add before we watch this?
Well, I would just say that the growing edge for the 6-2-1, 1-2-6, any of that tritype, is to begin to let go of the structure of how you should be and instead listening to your heart and intuition.
Great. Well, let's take a look at David.
Okay.
I'm a type 6, and in the heart center of intelligence, I actually lead with the 2 or giver type, although I do have connection to 3 too, which is a natural one in the Enneagram. In the body center, although I have some 9, I tend to lean on 1, the perfectionist, wanting to make things right and get to a kind of a sense of certainty there again, and knowing what's right and what's best to do, and can get a little judgmental and critical at times.
A great example, too, of language. I mean, when you have 1 and 6 coming together, you also get that tendency to critique things and can be critical. And he has a gentleness, yet you know someone's really there. The compassion's there, but there's a firm inner core. And that's what we see with this tritype.
Absolutely. And if you get to know Dr. Daniels at all, he's very warm, but there's also that professionalism with him, which certainly in his incredible career has served him well. I've sat on panels, as you have with David many times, and you have that friendly rapport, which is that 6 and 2 coming together, but you also have that understanding of structure and process and the teacher quality. You know, 6s that have more of the 9 aren't necessarily so obvious as teachers or mentors, but with David, I really feel that quality coming out. Anything else you'd like to add?
Just a little more defined, because he gave the example that he relates to 9, because 9 is a line of connection with 6, but knowing the 1 helped him articulate more clearly this definitive quality that the 1s have of what is right and what you should do.
That 1 and 6 combination gives us a little more tasking 6 and a little bit more of a solid 6, and a 6 that's going to be a little bit more on their own agenda than the 6 with the 9.
Yes.
And so, okay, well, let's take a look at another interesting example. This next example is an 8-6-4, and this is Spencer, and we call this the truth teller. We've covered some of the 8-6-4 combination already, but what can you tell us more about what that archetype looks like before we watch the clip?
Well, in particular, when the 8 is in charge, this is a protective person, and it's a dynamic, assertive individual. But the 4 brings a softness, more emotions, and the 6 brings increased loyalty, because both 6 and 8 are very loyal people. So this is a highly loyal, emotional, heartfelt, but decisive and focused 8. So you get that quality of someone that's going to show you their heart, and they're going to be more emotional, but they're still going to tell you what they think. They're still a truth teller.
Absolutely, and certainly if you get to know Spencer, he's a real people person.
Yes.
And that 6 makes him very engaging and people-focused, and that 4 gives him access to his emotions that 8 doesn't come to naturally. But when we see that 4 and 8 coming together, what I experience in the tritype is that it gives the 8 an access to real deep emotions, which you feel. It makes them a little bit more approachable and emotionally available.
And more introspective.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes them a much more introspective 8 than if you, for example, had 8 and 3 as a combination together. They'd have to work a little harder.
They're more fighters when it's 8 and 3.
More extroverted type of temperament. So the life purpose for this tritype is to identify what is insincere and not what it appears to be, and alert others of potential hazards. The blind spot is that they can be so focused on what is missing, threatening, and their emotional truth that they can become tyrannical. Explain that a little bit. What's that look like?
Well, it's really critical, and the growing edge for this tritype is that your truth is not necessarily the truth, that there are always more elements that can be considered when making any type of declaration, or any observation that you're going to call off would be more focused on your own.
Yeah, that makes sense. So when we take a look at Spencer here, notice a couple different things. First of all, he's triple reactive. He has all the reactive types, and you can see that in his reactions. Interestingly, he probably has the 9 wing, even though what we see here is more of the reactivity. So let's take a look at Spencer.
The whole passion I have, and how much I can get into something really is the 4 that comes out, and at the same time, I can be, if I'm not sure about something, I'll use that to empower myself more, like a counterphobic 6. But then, of course, it always comes down to the 8.
Okay, well, why don't you comment here on what you're seeing with Spencer?
Very definite. There isn't any confusion around his opinion. Yet he can also identify his personal process, and that's what we see with this tritype, in particular when 8's in charge.
So what I always notice with Spencer, and he used an interesting word, he said, not sure. That's a term that 6s use.
Yes.
An 8 with a 7 wing, for example, like yourself, I've never heard you use that. I've known you for 15 years. So we see a little bit of his 6 coming in there. It's going to give him a little bit more doubt, make him a little more engaging. And also with the 4, it gives him a little bit of that, you see almost a little bit of the sadness in there. You see that access to this deeper quality. He isn't just that kind of tough warrior 8 where you get a sense that this person is not easily going to access their feelings, or he's also much more approachable. I think maybe that's the word I'm looking for.
Yeah,
than
especially
a lot of
with
other
the
8s.
9 wing.
Yeah, with the 9 wing and 6 and the 4 in the tritype, it makes him in a way, a more emotionally approachable 8.
It's more like the grizzly bear.
Right.
Like the 8-7 is more the dragon, and the 8-9 is more the grizzly bear. And when it's 4-6-8, you have someone that's kind of hibernating, not really focused on any sort of problem. But then, when there is a problem, then the energy goes up, and they're more assertive. You get a piece of their mind, and then it goes back into the more introspective qualities.
Absolutely. So now we have a really interesting example where we have 2 women who are the same Enneagram type, but they're different tritypes. So can you tell us quickly what those tritypes are? Well, actually, the gentle spirit for Kim.
Yes.
For Tara, she's the researcher. For Kim, her combination is 4, 7, and 9. For Tara, her combination is 4, 5, and 1. So can you give us a review and contrast those 2 tritypes for both women who are both 4s?
Well, the 4-7-9 is a very gentle, soft-spoken 4. And they can often seem like a 9 to people or like a 7 because they take their pessimism or their fear of missing something and needing to call it off, and they suppress it more in favor of being more positive and optimistic. Whereas the 4-5-1 is edgier and more decisive and more introspective in a mental, technical way.
So when we watch these clips, I think with Kim, it's just as you said, she's this more gentle, sort of positive type 4, whereas with Tara, she's going to be sharper, more intellectual type 4. And just real quickly, the life mission for the 4-7-9 is to identify what is truly meaningful in life, to help people transform negative feeling into positive change. And for the 4-5-1, their life purpose is to study and learn as much as they can and teach from the wisdom teach their wisdom to others. And we talked about career, and these women have careers that match their tritype. Kim is in HR. It's a people-oriented, positive type of thing to do. And Tara is an artist and a photographer and a website builder, much more technical and introverted. So let's take a look at these, and we'll be looking at them back to back.
So my tritype's 4-7-9. As a 4, there's a part of me that's maybe more optimistic, especially for others, and that can be a little bit more afraid to admit my sadness. And as I've learned more about that tritype with the 7 and the 9, I see how that combination would definitely bring, it would challenge some of the 4 because it wouldn't want to be so, maybe depressed or so into the darker feelings. And yet that was my experience, but there was something kind of conflicting with that. And a lot of times people have said initially, oh, you don't seem like a 4. You seem maybe more like a 9. So it helps me understand that too.
That I'm a 4-5-1. And I have a very strong 1, a very attention to detail and specific, and in the 5 I really enjoy the technical aspects of some things, computers, photography, programs, that kind of thing.
So what I'm so struck with in these videos is that with Kim, we really see a much softer 4, and with Tara, we see what looks like a much more intellectual 4. You feel the precision. And Tara, again, they use their own language. She uses terms like detail, being specific, technical. This is the 451. These words match what we've found on the Ennea style questionnaires. And with Kim, she's using the similar language again, like optimistic. So what did you notice with these two types?
Well, the facial expressions. With Kim, you saw the softness and the sadness and the intuition and the depth in one way, whereas with Tara, it was more focused and sharper and more mental in its delivery.
Yeah, absolutely. I noticed the same thing, and it fascinates me that with Kim, that she would actually say as a 4 that it's part of her was afraid to admit her sadness.
Oh, yes.
And I probably, 4, how do you explain that? Because the 4 makes an identity out of their sadness. Well, you can explain it by that she has 2 positive types in her tritype. She has 7 and she has 9. So those 2 types, in a way, are contradicting what her dominant Enneagram type 4 is telling her. Whereas with Tara, in some ways, her types are even more in alignment. She's got a line to 1, it doubles up her 1. She has a 5 wing and 5 in the tritype, so it's going to amplify her 5. So all of her types kind of continue in a similar direction, whereas with Kim, we actually get types that are sort of in a different direction and balancing it out.
Right.
Anything you'd add to that?
Well, she didn't say that she didn't have sadness, but it's showing the sadness. It's more of a secret. It's more hidden with the 479. Whereas with the 451, there's much more precision and feeling comfortable declaring it.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's take a look at another example with 2 different people. Here we have the reverse situation. Right. We have people of 2 different Enneagram types, but they're the same Tritype archetype. Right. We have Joanne, who is the one, is Joanne the 125 or the 152? Do you know what she sees herself
125.
as? 125. And then we have James, who's a retired doctor, and James sees himself as a 512. And what we see with both of them is this kind of upright, proper, friendly countenance. But before we look at that, what would you describe the archetype for this?
Well, when these 3 types come together, you get someone that's very diligent, that's the 1, very caring, which is the 2, wanting to be supportive and help people, and then focused on the information needed. And I find that when they merge and come together and collude in a worldview, you have someone that kind of moves between finding what needs to be done and finding a gentle way to do it, a compassionate way. And if you look at the careers of these 2 people, it's very supportive of that. Joanne is an executive administrator, and James was an internist that helped people by using his mental abilities to diagnose and understand his patients' problems.
So quickly before we take a look, the life purpose for this combination is to use their wisdom to provide the information needed to manifest ideals that help those in need. We see a 1, 2, and 5 coming together, and the blind spot is that they can be so identified with their standards and procedures that they can fail to trust their heart and appear to be overly judgmental. So let's take a look.
I'm a 125, and the way I learned it was by taking the test. I had always thought I followed the lines of connection to 4 and 7, and then after testing, became aware of the 2 and the 5, and it took a while to integrate them, but they make sense, they resonate. I like to help people, so that there's the aspect of the 2, to make that contribution. And with the 5, there's the other side of it is to be a bit more withdrawn, more reserved, and need more quiet time. And I also think it also helps me solve puzzles. So I'm an orderly 1, but I'm also a problem solver.
When Katherine came out with those archetypes, it seemed like it was right on 512 or 125 or one of those things, because it was a mentor, and that's what I did my whole life, and I'm very comfortable doing that. The 1 seems very strong to me because more and more, I get into situations in which people are, doing a service for me, but don't seem to be doing it right, and it does make me very angry. The 2 was much more subtle and very sensitive to how they feel or how they feel about me, but much less in tune with how I'm really feeling, and I can put my own feelings on a back burner. 512 is right on.
Yeah. So what did you notice? There's so much to see here, but what captured
Very
your attention?
articulate, very clear on what processes they use when. They're generally very introspective. They can assess things very emotionally and intellectually, and at the same time discern and judge and determine variables in a way that the 1 can.
What I noticed with this tri-type combination is that you have the 1 and the 5, which can be kind of standoffish and focused on procedure, whereas when you bring the 2 in, suddenly you get someone who's people-focused and helpful. Yeah. So it's an interesting, almost contradiction in objectives between these types. But I certainly, knowing both these, both Joanne and James personally and watching their videos, you see that. You see the mentor quality in both of them. You see this intellectual quality in both of them. But you also get a sense that these are friendly people. And these are people that are very helpful people. I think that the 2 makes them particularly focused on other people's needs, even sometimes at the expense of their own.
Right.
So is there anything you would add
well,
to help us understand the mentor?
Well, that's why we see this type as the mentor. And they're especially focused on having a kind of kindness. It's a value. The 1 makes it a value for them to have kindness as equally important to having information.
And again, we've seen the same use of words. Joanne used words like puzzles and help. So I think we're getting very close here to the end of the show. And we want to thank everyone for joining us. And before we conclude, we just wanted to give you a few quick resources where you can learn more about the Enneagram. So, for example, people can go to enneagram.net for their testing. We're on Facebook. If you go to Facebook and look for Enneagram Explorations, you can find our page. On Twitter, you can follow us. It's just keyword is Enneagram. Anything else you'd suggest for people?
Well, if they want to know more about the 9 types, we have a full page and a half on each type on enneagram.net. Absolutely.
Oh, that's great. Well, it's been wonderful to explore the tri-type again, and it's so much more of a precise and interesting way to work with the Enneagram, I find. It's just really, really accurate.
And I look forward to additional research. We're going to be sending out something soon.